is what I think makes the book, really, is that you're talking about two English kids from working class backgrounds. And so often, because of the way the education system is run in South American societies, it's harder for working class kids from South America to have that kind of platform here in this orange juice that I'm drinking. And that's part of the story. Refrigeration. When refrigeration comes in, Uruguay is a fabulous producer of beef. And when you can refrigerate it and transport it across the Atlantic, you can make money. Brazil is huge as well, because Brazil 70 is at the height of Brazil's military dictatorship. And at this time, there is really an idea that Brazil, the country, can be a model for development in what was then called the Third World, because there's more to discover. You know, there's more that we don't know that we're finding out, and we know we're writing for an audience that don't really know much about these either.
Hola y bienvenidos otra vez a mi canal de YouTube Español por Dentro. Estoy aquí con dos invitados muy especiales que han escrito sobre fútbol en la América del Sur. Estoy aquí con escritores Mark Biram y Tim Vickery. Hello Mark, hello Tim, thank you so much for being here.
Our pleasure.
Thanks very much for having us.
It's okay. So while this channel is exclusively in Spanish, but yes, for the sake of today's interview, we're going to talk with Tim and Mark in English, and we're going to talk about the book that has been recently written by both of them called Mundiales, a South American History of the World Cup. And since it deals with South America, and which is central to this channel, so it's again a wonderful opportunity for me to talk to Tim and Mark about their book that has come out recently. Firstly, congratulations to both of you for the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just give a very brief intro of both Tim and Mark. So Tim Vickery is based in Rio de Janeiro, and he has been writing for World Soccer and broadcasting weekly on BBC Radio's World Football phone-in since 1997. And for more than 15 years, he has been appearing every week on the Brazilian TV. Whereas Mark Biram is a writer and academic who holds a PhD in Hispanic Studies and specializes in South American football. He is the author of Women's Football in Brazil and Colombia and Viva Colombia. So once again, for me, it's an honor, Mark and Tim, to have you both. Firstly, I would like to start with Tim and then with Mark. So this book, Mundiales, a History of the South American Football in World Cup. So how did this journey begin for both of you? We'll start with Tim.
Well, I'm going to start by passing the ball across the Atlantic to Mark, because the brainchild was very much his. So Mark, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that's very kind, and yeah, I mean, I thought for a long time that it was a book that kind of needed writing. I mean, I quite obviously, there's lots of books about the World Cup in both the Spanish and the Portuguese language in South America. Too many to name, but I thought the story from a South American perspective has never really appeared fully in the English language. So I thought this could be an interesting niche to occupy. It could be an interesting book to write. And yeah, I felt that whilst there's good books out there in the English language, I really enjoyed the Brian Glanville book, the History of the World Cup. I felt it's never been done kind of from an exclusively South American perspective. So I pitched to pitch the editorial who's published the book with the idea, and you know, happily they accepted it. And I was just getting to the stage of beginning to write it when I happened to find myself in Rio with Tim. We sat down and had a coffee for the second time. I'd met Tim before during my PhD days, and it just kind of struck me out of the blue, really, that the book would be infinitely better with Tim, and I just kind of chanced my arm and thought, I wonder if you'll be interested. I suggested the idea, and Tim kind of kind of immediately saw value in it, I guess. And then this is where the balls pass back to Tim, I guess.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's a story. I agree with Mark on almost everything. It's a story that needed to be told because it's still not known the extent to which the World Cup is a South American project. All right, there's lots of France there because France was so big inside FIFA. But were it not for South America, the World Cup wouldn't have started until the late 50s rather than starting in 1930. And I think very, very few people know that. But it's also a story which is not particularly alive in large parts of South America, especially, I think, Brazil. And this, I immediately saw the value of the project because South America is huge. It's a big, big place. And it's divided, the Pope actually divided it down the middle into a Spanish half and a Portuguese half, and the Spanish half splintered into all those nations. The Portuguese half remains Brazil. And it is striking how little those two halves know of each other. So sometimes you'll read a South American perspective from, say, an Argentine or Uruguayan writer, and you immediately come up against, they don't know anything about Brazil. I really saw this in the 2014 World Cup, where people were, fixers who were working for the South American media in Brazil were saying they're just terrified of everything. They don't understand anything. They don't understand the language as it's spoken. They don't understand anything. They're just terrified of it. It's foreign soil as far as they're concerned. So the idea of having two voices, one a specialist in the Spanish part and one a specialist in the Portuguese part, that makes the book, I think. And had we not done it that way, I don't think it would have been anything like as good as the work that we finished with. So it was a story that needed telling, and I thought the pair of us could tell it in the right way, not least because we're kind of outsiders, insiders. And I think that's important because when you're talking about South American football, especially in the South Cone, which is, Uruguay, Argentina, and like the southeast of Brazil. So these are the heartlands of football. These are the areas where football developed quickest and with most influence. There's so many myths around and so many nationalistic myths. And I think we've got that outsider perspective to cut through some of those myths. And some people will be angry at the idea of two English people treading on this South American territory. You never hear them say, no, we South Americans shouldn't be writing about English football or British football. You never hear it the other way around, but you do hear it this way around. But I think that makes it better as well because we come to it without the nationalist stereotypes. And I think that's given us a better view, a clearer view. Maybe a less emotionally involved view, but it's not our purpose to be emotionally involved. It's our purpose to tell the story. So I've only just been reading it since it came out. I hadn't read it before it came out, and I think, blimey, this is really good. I really like this. I think I was worried about it at the start, thinking, well, I love trees. The trees have to die for what me and Biram are going to do. And if a few trees have perished, at least I think they've hopefully perished in a good cause.
Fantastic. No, in fact, it did strike my mind when I first heard about the book being written by two Britishers. Yeah. So you said that, Tim, that you don't get to hear if a South American has written a book about, say, English football or European football, but you hear it the other way around. So, I throw it back to both of you again, Mark and Tim, that during the process of writing this book, did you feel that being non-South Americans, would there be a part of the book that would be left not being done justice to because of the fact that you were not native to the region about which you were writing?
In no way, ever. No, and I've been here for more than half my life. I'm married to a Brazilian girl. I've sustained a Brazilian family. I've paid my dues, pal. So anyone who thinks I don't have the right to have an opinion, I'm sorry. That way fascism lies. Not having it.
Right, right. And how about you, Mark?
Yeah, I guess I kind of feel similar. I mean, I think it's interesting. We kind of touch on this from the outset almost, and I think this kind of prickliness about outsiders writing about the continent as numerous reasons that are relatively obvious. I guess, kind of first of all, the kind of intrinsic importance it has to identity on the continent, in ways that it doesn't in Europe, in quite the same way. The experience of colonialism, these things are all important, but I think, as Tim says, ultimately they don't mean that we can't have an opinion about it. We're very
I think is what I think makes the book really is that you're talking about two English kids from working class backgrounds, and so often, because of the way the education system is run in South American societies, it's harder for working class kids from South America to have that kind of platform. Many of the writers are from the money classes, and frankly, they don't know very much about their own country. They don't. They've been isolated from it, and that's certainly not been my experience in Brazil, and I don't think that's Mark's experience in the places that he's been as well. So obviously, these are just our opinions, right? We're dealing with facts, but it is our perspective on those facts. And both of us are well aware of the insignificance of our own opinions. But both of us have paid our dues sufficiently to have the right to have that opinion. And I think that we've expressed that opinion with clarity, and we've come up with a very interesting book.
Yes, Mark, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I just completely agree with what Tim's saying there. I think the book is almost certainly shaped by our own social backgrounds, and perhaps, I mean, I haven't read every single book that's written in the Spanish and Portuguese language on the topic, but perhaps those kind of perspectives are not highlighted enough because of the class background of some of the people involved in writing about South American football traditionally in the Spanish and Portuguese language. And I mean, I think everything I've written, the previous two books, the Colombia one and the women's football one, certainly my class background is of fundamental importance, really, in the way things come across. I mean, at the beginning, I kind of cowered a little bit when Tim referred to it as a project, and I thought, as long as he doesn't go as far as to start talking about our football in philosophy or something that sounds even more kind of high-handed. But I think we can accept a project. I think that's kind of fine. But I think naturally we kind of fairly humble about what we do, and hopefully that kind of comes through.
Great. Fantastic. I mean, I just one small point on which I don't quite agree with Tim is when he says that he's aware of the insignificance of his opinions. I do genuinely feel, Tim, that you are an authority on South American football, having followed you since a couple of years now, and I've been chasing you, Tim, since quite some time for this interview. So that frankly shows, the significance or the importance that a person like you and Mark carry for this book. My next question is
football is about players and then supporters and so on. We come very, very low down in the hierarchy, and I think it's wise of us to remember that. But please go on.
Yeah. So it's connected in some way to the earlier chat that we've had. That my next question is that do you think overall in the history of football and World Cup especially, that it has been too Eurocentric in various aspects? What is your opinion, Mark and Tim, on that? Has football been too Eurocentric for too much of a time now?
I guess it depends who's telling the tale, no? And I mean, I guess I mean I think both Tim and I both look up to people like Brian Glanville as writers. Um, but I guess by definition, his perspective is likely to be Eurocentric because he didn't spend much of his life outside Europe, and you know that's not a criticism of him. And yeah, I mean, depends who we're talking about, I guess.
There's an irony here, isn't there? Because I think football is one of the few areas in contemporary life where Europe maintains its prominent position. When I think the continent of Europe is becoming every day less relevant. And we are, Mr. Chandrasekhar, we are in the Asian century, are we not? My brother is married to a Cambodian woman, and he tells me every day you're in the Asian century. But football is an area where Europe has become even more important over the last 30 years or so as the game has globalized. So while in so many fields Europe has become less important, in football the reverse has happened. But back to Mark's point, it really does depend on who's telling the story, and specifically the story of the World Cup. The South American contribution has been overlooked, and I think this is increasingly important because the club game is increasingly being taken over by private interests, and you know who your lawyer is, it has become as important as who your centre forward is. Mm-hmm. There is some purity about the World Cup. There is some purity about, even though I have problems with exacerbated nationalism, but there is still some purity about people there representing their own population, and so my hunch is that over the next few years, people will become even more interested in the international game, just because the club game is now a toy for billionaires, and so giving due respect to South America for what it's done for the World Cup, both the past, also the present, and maybe the future. You know, our continent, our adopted continent, started the World Cup, has the team that's won the World Cup the most times, and has the current champions. And so that there was such a compelling reason to write this book. And Mark ends there with the idea of looking ahead to the Women's World Cup, which is in Brazil next year. Now, in women's football, South America hasn't been as important, so it's a completely different narrative. But maybe the World Cup coming to South America will be a push factor for the women's game in the continent as well. So that I thought that's a lovely way to end the book. Looking forward.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So I want to take you both back to the first ever World Cup in 1930, Mark and Tim. So why was Uruguay, if I'm not wrong, Uruguay was the venue for the World Cup as well. And what was its prominence at that point of time? Why was it so crucial in the World Cup? I remember you just said a while back the South Cone, which has Uruguay and a couple of other countries. So that's where the heartland lies in South American football. So I want Mark and Tim to take us back to that first World Cup, and why was that significant in the history of football World Cup and Uruguay in particular?
I've got quite a lot of ice here in this orange juice that I'm drinking, and that's part of the story. Refrigeration. When refrigeration comes in, Uruguay is a fabulous producer of beef, and when you can refrigerate it and transport it across the Atlantic, you can make money. You know, for many years Europe wasn't able to feed itself because it's too busy having wars, and so Uruguay had an economic prominence at that time based on beef and refrigeration. Now, it's a vital technological advance. And this is something I don't think anyone would have predicted, say in 1880, that South America, the South Cone, football just caught on very, very quickly, went massive. And again, geopolitics plays a part because 1916, Europe is tearing itself apart on the Somme and on the Eastern fronts. South America is inventing the Copa America, the equivalent of the Euros or the Asian Cup in 1916. It's more than 40 years before Europe reaches that point. And Uruguay win it. And Uruguay are the big power in the early years. And that's got a lot to do with the fact that this wealth, where refrigeration has helped, is being channeled into financing a welfare state. There is a progressive social model. And so football in these places, it's introduced by the British. This place is in an informal part of the British Empire. It's very, very important to remember that. It's an informal part of the British Empire. The British have learned you don't have to occupy somewhere militarily. That costs money. You just get them by the purse strings. You just control the finances. And it's British sailors and railway workers and teachers who do so much to introduce the game. So it starts from the elite. And there are attempts to keep it within the elite. But those attempts are less successful in Uruguay because Uruguay is very progressive, and Uruguay has an excellent school system, free. People can read very, very early in Uruguay. So when football starts, there's a sports press that will spread the game. The players, the very, very first Copa America, 1916, Uruguay are selecting not only poor players, but black players. Now, that doesn't happen in Brazil. Poor black players don't get in for another 15 years or so. And so this gives Uruguay an early prominence. And it means that when Mark's early chapters will tell you how Uruguay basically invented the modern game in the 1924 Olympics. Did they not, Mark Biram?
They certainly did. They certainly did. And it seems kind of counterintuitive now, but I think the small, compact nature of Uruguay kind of plays in its favor in that period in a way. I mean, you look at the modern World Cup and you think, is it conceivable that a country of 3-4 million can win the World Cup? I mean, Croatia almost did it, of course. So yes, it is, but it seems less conceivable than it was then. And such a kind of small, compact nation, it was kind of possible to be as progressive as Tim described, to kind of institute that first welfare state in a way that probably would have been more complex to do in a country the size of a continent like Brazil in the same kind of way. So Uruguay's kind of size plays in its favor in that period. I think it's booming in the way that Tim describes, and of course the World Cup is on a far smaller scale at that stage, so it's not inconceivable for a relatively small country to run the thing in a way that obviously now it would be. I mean, it only really, even to this day, only has one city in any kind of meaningful sense of the word. I'm sure one or two other places are technically classified as cities, but beyond Montevideo, there's nowhere of any real size. But that's kind of not a problem at the period of the first World Cup, and in 1930, they're more than good enough to win, despite being a small nation. And the small size kind of plays in their favor. They're willing to run the World Cup, to pay people's transport to get there. It just kind of works. And of course, the first World Cup isn't perfect. They try to have 16 teams, and is it 13, Tim, that actually get to the World Cup? I think it's 3 European teams end up pulling out, and I mean, a 13-team World Cup, obviously it's it's a silly number. Many things about the tournament are not perfect in the same way that the early women's World Cups are not perfect, but it gets the ball rolling, and Uruguay are playing this spectacular football that we've seen at the 24 and 28 Olympics, and it kind of it snowballs pretty fast after that.
It's really striking to read the contemporary accounts there of the Europeans seeing Uruguay in like 24. They'd never seen anything like it.
Exactly.
They've seen a black player. I've never seen that before. Most of them,
No.
But just the style of the football, the beauty of the football, it reads a lot like journalist nearly 50 years later writing about Brazil 1970. Balletic, the way that, so there are three massive stages, I think, in South American football. It's introduced by the British for the first world prestige. Here we're at number 2. It's reinterpreted by the locals. This is the nature of the game itself. It's such a simple game, but in that simple game, there are so many complexities. The player on the ball, he's got so many options. He can do so many different things. So obviously the way that you approach football tells you a lot about who you are. And the South Americans, low center of gravity, great for football. Not good for a lot of other sports, but great for football. So they reinterpret what was kind of muscular Christianity in the British, hard line, straight running. It becomes a game of swerves and feints, a much more beautiful thing. So introduced by the British, reinterpreted by the locals, and this reinterpretation leads to international triumphs and international recognition for a region. And look at the map. It's a long, long way away. That's not Eurocentric. That's geography. That's the map. You look at the South Cone of South America. There's a lot of ocean one way and a lot of ocean the other way, and a long way to the South Pole there, and a long, long way to the north above. And this is why, with such amazing speed, it becomes absolutely crucial to South American identities. On Uruguay, for example, how many other things about Uruguay can people think of? And even Brazil, with the size of Brazil, when the international audience think of Brazil, how many things do you think of? You think of Carnival, you think of the Amazon, you don't think of much else, but you think of football. And so football, right from these Uruguay triumphs in 24, 28 and 30, the famous phrase that the coach uttered when they came to England to play the 66 World Cup. Other countries have their history. Uruguay has its football.
Well, amazing. And sticking to Uruguay, of course, from those heady days of 1930, and then they won their second and the last World Cup till date that they won in 1950, the famous final that they played against Brazil. Since then, it's been like they produced some wonderful players over the decades. So one that comes to my mind is Diego Forlan, quite recent. What is the state of football in Uruguay as of now? Obviously, it's still probably the number one sport in the country, but in terms of achieving success on the global stage, that has been quite difficult for Uruguay. So how do you see that?
Punch is massively above its weight, and here you have to uncouple the domestic league from the national team. Mm-hmm. And this is increasingly true in so many different countries, because the entire team play abroad. And with just 3 million people, you don't have any market. Before the TV age, the Uruguayan clubs, the big ones, Peñarol and Nacional, could compete with anyone because they've got 70,000 people in their stadium. Real Madrid have got 70,000 people in their stadium. It's the same. Once the TV money comes in, and Europe does this very well, Europe claims the world. Now, in your part of the world, I know this because I have friends in India and so on. So many of them are Premier League fans. They're fans of Premier League clubs.
Yes,
Europe has managed to sell its product all across the world. And obviously Uruguay can't do that. So Uruguayan domestic football is extremely poor. And they haven't won South America's Champions League, the Copa Libertadores, since 1988. They've hardly come close in all of that time. But they still produce lots of players. The national team can still be strong. So there's an uncoupling, a great uncoupling between the domestic game and international football. In international football, if they get it right, they can compete with anyone, and they really can. And the side is doing very badly at the moment. Marcelo Bielsa looks like a lamentable end to his career at the moment. It's looking very, very sad. But if they get all the players that they produce, if they get them to fire together, then they reach the semi-finals of the World Cup in 2010, and they can do that again. They still produce players. Remember, in a cup competition, you don't have to win all your games. In this year's World Cup, you don't have to win any game to be world champions. You can draw your three group games and then draw everything else and win on penalty shootouts. So in a cup competition, there's always the possibility of Uruguay being difficult opponents.
Right. Now, Mark, I want to take you now towards the next question first. According to you, which World Cup in South America represents best the link between football and politics, according to you?
It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. I mean, there's so many kind of obvious choices, isn't there?
And I would like both of you to probably go beyond just the World Cup and talk in general as well about politics and football in South America a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most kind of blindingly obvious one would maybe be 78, the Argentine dictatorship. So I'm kind of tempted to not go for that one, but I'm just trying to think which other might fit. Yeah, I don't know. Have you got any ideas with that one, Tim?
No, 78 is the obvious one, didn't it?
Yeah.
Brazil 70 is huge as well. Because
Right,
Brazil
yeah.
70 is at the height of Brazil's military dictatorship. And at this time, there is really an idea that Brazil, the country, can be a model for development in what was then called the Third World. You see during the 60s this concept of the Third World develop. And a big part of the campaign of João Havelange to become FIFA president, he achieved it in 1974. But a big part of that campaign was the idea of presenting Brazil to the rest of the world as a model for multiracial development. So 70 is huge. It all goes wrong because the economy crashes. But for a while, Havelange is seen as the white Pelé. And you've got this idea of Havelange as a representative of the entrepreneurial class. And the dictatorship is a kind of alliance between the military and the technocrats. So Havelange as the white Pelé, creating the conditions for the black Pelé, i.e. the mass of the population, to achieve their potential. So that was huge in 70. But so many of them, because as a consequence of its importance as a social phenomenon and as a representation of the nation, very, very early on, governments thought, wow, we need to use this power. And 1950, for example, is explicitly for Brazil the moment when it is emerging as the giants, the country of the future, as the German academic Stefan Zweig termed it, cursed it probably. So it's very much 1950 a twin task. We are going to build the Maracanã Stadium, the biggest stadium in the world, and we're going to win. And the two together will show that we are a country that no one will be able to stop in the future. So all of these have a huge, huge political importance. I don't know, Mark, if that importance is as great these days, if the link between maybe societies have become more sophisticated and perhaps
Possibly. I mean, it struck me thinking about it that, one to give a tippy-tappy 1-2 back to yourself as we silky Northern Englishmen do. But perhaps the 2014 World Cup was quite an interesting political moment. I mean, with the Confederations Cup that kind of came before that. I mean, that perhaps if you're thinking about politics in terms of kind of realism, and it was kind of quite a dystopian political moment. But
that's a good point, because that's almost like the reverse. It's the end of a government project, where 14 represents the end of Brazil's mini boom, which had been felt the year before, and is one of the reasons behind all that wave of protest. So it's always there. It's always the link is always there, because the most potent symbol of the nation is the shirt of the national team. So there's been a fight in recent years in Brazil for ownership of that shirt. When the far right took
it kind of started there, didn't it, with that Confederations Cup before the Brazil World Cup. Really,
there's a fight back now. Slightly, so it is, Some of the earlier ones I think are just so blatant. On 78 in Argentina is so blatant. 70 in Brazil, 50 in Brazil. They are so blatantly political operations. Maybe now society has become more sophisticated. I don't know, but the link will always remain. Politicians can't afford to ignore it.
At that World Cup as well, there was kind of such an obvious presence, and we've seen this in the World Cups that follow. I mean, both Tim and I talked about, the Peruvians in Russia, but at the 2014 World Cup, there was such an obvious presence of the new Latin American middle class, I guess, who'd kind of come out of neoliberalism in a sense, not kind of in any kind of perfect or idealized sense, but the Latin American middle class were there in droves, weren't they? In Brazil, perhaps not only the middle class in the case of Argentina, perhaps the working class were there in droves as well. I
saw it for the first time in the Copa America in Argentina in 2011, because I always went to all the Copa Americas, and so often, unless the game involved the hosts or a neighbouring country, there's more police in the stadium than there are fans. And then suddenly, 2011, you get this massive travelling Colombian army, so you can see that the continent is changing, and you really see how much the World Cup is their thing. I mean, I know it's not strictly South America. It used to be, but Panama is no longer not part of South America because the Americans managed to separate it from Colombia in order to build the canal. But when Panama played their first World Cup game in Russia in 2018 against Belgium, a good team, a team that reaches the semi-finals, there's more fans of Panama in the stadium than there are fans of Belgium. It's extraordinary. So that shows you the extent to which the South American fan embraces this, which is a problem for this World Cup, as we saw 2 years ago in the final of the Copa America, where Colombia get there. It's the first time they've had an occasion like this outside Colombia. And the Colombians, I think it's the sixth biggest immigrant community in the States. They all wanted to be there. And the security arrangement there of the United States authorities, they've got no experience of dealing with this level of passion. This is not an entertainment event. This is a national rally of Colombia. And so the event was an absolute farce, with people getting in all over the place and the kickoff delayed and all the rest of it. So it's interesting if I'm sure FIFA will do that better than the US authorities did 2 years ago, but it does present a challenge for them,
especially in the times that we're living in. My next question is to both of you, Mark and Tim, about who best or better represents South American football. Is it Pelé or is it Diego Maradona? I know it's a tough question to answer.
It's such a great question. It's a great question.
And I would like to you to both tell me about the importance of these two giants of the game in the region, and whichever you choose, why.
Our book, I think, and if you can read every chapter separately, but if you read it all together, I think there's an arc there. And I think the key character of our book is Pelé. I think you can divide the history of the World Cup in three acts. The first act is a kind of waiting for Pelé. The second act is Pelé arrives, Brazil win 3 World Cups in 4, establish themselves as the spiritual guardians of the beautiful game, and establish the World Cup as the made-for-TV event that stops the planet for a month every 4 years. And then after that, everything that's happened has been in the shadow of Mexico 70. And I think it was gloriously appropriate that Lionel Messi finally won the World Cup in Pelé's last conscious days on Earth. Okay. So for the World Cup, I think it's Pelé's story more than anything else. But for South American football, I would probably argue, and I've done this on Brazilian TV and got quite a backlash for it, that Maradona is the perfect exponent of South American football. In part, the racial mix, is it like a bit of Italian immigrant and indigenous, especially the physical build, center of gravity low, difficult to knock off the ball, and the story of '86. And those two goals, he plays better against Belgium in the semi-final, even than he does against England. But the two goals that he scores against England, the way he scores them is a football anti-colonial protest. You could not have scripted this. The first goal with his hand, it's the revenge of the powerless. Johnny English has all the power. And a lot of this at the time, the focus was on the Falklands, Malvinas. It goes so much deeper. It goes to the idea of Argentina being effectively a financial colony of England without the military occupation. So the English are always a reference. There's always this love-hate relationship with them. And but the first goal with his hand, it's the revenge of the powerless. It's, look, they've got all the formal power, but we can run rings around them. We're cleverer, we're sharper, we're smarter than they are. We can find a way to get by even in difficult circumstances. And then the second goal, well, we're better anyway. So on that day, he lived out such a deep Argentine, maybe South American fantasy. And he made it real. And it's the day that killed him, really. Because that is the day, much more than winning the World Cup, that's the day that turned him into a god, with absolute disastrous consequences.
The day the Church of Maradona was born.
Indeed, indeed. So Pelé, I would see Pelé as the hero, the biggest hero of our World Cup story, but Maradona as the perfect exponent of the history of South American football. But Mark may disagree.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, I think it depends what if you're talking about kind of football style, or if you're talking about kind of what kind of personalities the two were. I mean,
a mix of both, and also just the sheer impact that they had in the region.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably, Pelé goes on to have a trajectory where he's kind of almost embedded within football institutions. He's kind of I suppose a bit more of an establishment man in a sense. He kind of a lot more. I think that's understatement of the century, probably, isn't it? So I don't know. Pelé becomes, in a sense, a bit more of a politician, and Maradona a bit more kind of overtly political in the, I mean, he associates himself with all kinds of revolutionary causes in the region in a way Pelé never would have done, I guess. So which one of those is more South American? I mean, I think they're both deeply South American in different ways, aren't they? Kind of the two different trajectories they follow. So yeah, I mean, that's more the kind of political side. From a football side, yeah, I don't know. It's I mean, like Tim said, I mean,
Very
Pelé's
difficult,
all
yeah.
over the book, isn't he? He's all over the book. He's kind of, but I think he's the key protagonist of the book, really. I mean, I did write my longest chapter about Maradona. I did kind of indulge myself writing about '86 on the other hand. So, no, I'm really struggling to jump off either way.
Okay. No, thanks for that, both Mark and Tim. My next question, I want both of you to dig a little deeper into how football has shaped the national identity in South America. And I'm sure that while you would have been researching for writing about the book, you would have delved into this a lot more as well. Because Mark and Tim, when Brazil won the World Cup in 2002, and till Argentina won it in 2022, there was a gap of 20 years where South America went without winning a World Cup. And there were talks, especially say in India, I would say that probably and we Indians, the crazy football fans are really crazy about Argentina, especially, and of course Brazil as well. But there's a feeling that probably South America is going backwards, and Europe is leaving it far behind. With this huge gap that came. So, in what way has sort of from say the 50s, 60s to the modern times has the football shaped the identity of South America? and how important was it for Argentina to win the 22 World Cup for South American football?
I think it's got much harder to win because Europe has got much better. Tabares, the very educated man who coached Uruguay for so long, qualified teacher, and always with a long-term perspective. He used to say that Europe used to train its youth for war, and it's now learnt to train its youth for football. May have to learn to train its youth for war again in the future, who knows? But it is striking how Europe, Western Europe, with the exception of Italy, is producing talent. I mean, the Brazil-Belgium game in 2018, where Belgium eliminate Brazil in the quarter-final. There's players in that Belgian side for whom there is no equivalent in Brazil. One of these is Lukaku, the centre-forward. Brazil haven't had a centre-forward like that for a long time. Probably most significant, De Bruyne. Brazil haven't been producing that kind of midfielder. And also Eden Hazard. I mean, the most stereotypically South American player on the field was Eden Hazard. Low centre of gravity. Difficult to knock off the ball. I remember a couple of months afterwards doing a TV show with a fellow who was coach at Brazil at that time. And he, full of respect, he said, "That son of a bitch Hazard." They just couldn't cope with him, you know. So this is Belgium. And what's the population of Belgium, for crying out loud? I've just been watching France in these recent FIFA dates. And France beat Brazil, beat them well, despite playing most of the second half with 10 men. And then the French B side just destroyed Colombia, who were at full strength. And you're thinking, wow, look at this. Look at this. And even England, I mean, one of Argentina's greatest pundits is a fellow called Diego Latorre. He was a good player. He was one of those Maradonas who didn't become a Maradona. He's a better pundit probably than he was a player. And I remember a couple of years ago, he was writing about the new generation of English talent. And he said, well, so many of them just look like products of Argentine street football. So it's a relative thing. You know, if you're trying to win the World Cup, there's an opposition there that want to win it as well. And this really isn't particularly well understood, especially in Brazil. That, you know, the level of difficulty is far, far greater than it used to be. And many in Brazil, their kind of minds in terms of expectations, their minds are frozen in that 58-70 period. They think that is normality. And anything which isn't that is deviating from normality, and there's something wrong. So for these countries of the South Cone, the idea of being winners is really, really important. For the countries that have come subsequently, the World Cup is not something that they expect to win. Although Colombia could, you know, potentially, Colombia have the potential. Biggest population of Spanish South America. Lots of urban centres. Colombian club football should be much, much better than it is. But there's not really an expectation yet that they're going to win these things. But when they get to World Cups, it's that moment when they're shouting out to the world, hey, we exist. You're going to notice us now. But for Uruguay, Argentina and Brazil, it's we're going to win. And being winners is so important to the identity. You will read lots of bad things about Brazilian football that say it's not about winning, it's all about expressing yourself and no one cares about the score. Nothing could be further from the truth. It really is all about winning. This is the sphere in life. I remember the great Tostão, played with Pelé in 1970, saying, football is the mechanism through which we Brazilians feel avenged. You lot might be the masters of other things in life. We're the masters of this. So he used a phrase I thought was great. He said, for us, it's something heroic. It's something which is heroic on a national basis. I think that's probably the best description I've ever heard.
Fantastic. Yes, Mark, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me was like in modern times that we've seen this kind of footballization of society, which is something our foreword writer David Goldblatt has touched on quite often, and you know, he's talked about how various kind of populist leaders use football for political purposes. You know, I think thinking back to the Russia World Cup with Putin and maybe Orban in Hungary and one other that I shouldn't mention, not a million miles from where I am in here in Ankara. And you know, this kind of footballization of society has been quite marked. Um, and I mean, South America is not completely exempt from it. I mean, we talked about the Brazilian shirts being politicized in the pre 2014 World Cup. Maybe Juan Manuel Santos kind of used football quite a lot. He was quite often pictured in a Colombia shirt. But I do wonder if Latin America um, is maybe maturing to a point where this kind of populist use of football is kind of to pull off now. I mean, unless I'm missing a trick, Tim, can you think of any political leaders who've kind of really
No,
managed to?
I think you're right. Not least because, and again, the way that you end the book hints at this. Just the importance of women in these societies. The importance of women. I think the future of so much of South America. When I look at it, I look at the future and I think it's female, and that's a new story to be told, in which, as we were saying earlier on, football plays a very very different part, doesn't it? You know, in terms of women's football, it's all other people have created the party,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's we want in as well. Whereas in men's football, you could argue that the South Americans created the party and everyone else is welcome. Come on in. But it's our party. We did it. We built the foundations. In women's football, it's different. The party's there.
Yeah.
It's going on. We've been excluded. We want in. So
Yes.
I think that's a new dynamic going on there.
It is absolutely, and I mean the links to national identity are obviously historically strong as well. I mean, you know, Tim mentioned earlier the quote from Ondino Vieira, for the Uruguayan coach in, you know, other countries have the history. Uruguay has its football, and you know, kind of historically it's kind of there. But I just wonder if now there's kind of a shift taking place, and probably it's a lot of it's to do with gender, as Tim said. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how these things play out in the next few years, coming decades even.
Mm.
But yeah, it seems striking to me that you know, a continent where the links between football and national identity seem so manifest that in these times of populism, I mean, it's never really figured in you know, we have caste now in Chile, and we have the name's escaping me in Argentina. Why can I not remember the guy's name?
You don't want to remember Millet. You don't want to remember.
Yes, Millet. Yes, of course, Millet. Yep. And yeah, I mean, I don't think in either of those cases football was that central, you know, to the horrors.
Well, Millet's fighting with football. He wants it all
Yes.
privatized.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there are perhaps reasons for this, but it's kind of interesting. It's
Right.
interesting.
Right. And somewhere sticking to part of the previous question. So my next question is that is the traditional South American style of play still alive today, Tim and Mark? Because over the decades we've seen South America, and maybe to the point of being stereotyped a bit or generalized a bit, that they are known for being flamboyant. They have the flair. They have this beauty in their football, while European football is more about method, more about systems, more about structures. Do you think that that kind of difference is still there, or do you think in some ways Europe has been able to catch up with that style of play? And what do you have to say about this South American style of play in today's age?
I mean, I think probably the styles of play plural would probably be the first thing to mention. I mean, I think when we talk about the you know, the kind of style that you've just described, it's probably most easily linked with, you know, Argentina and Brazil, or maybe the very early Uruguay that kind of that wowed the world in the 20s, 30s. But yeah, I mean, how much a country like, say, Paraguay fits into a traditional, you know, kind of romanticized South American style of play is dubious, isn't it? But is it still alive today? I mean, I guess we've kind of touched on it with what Tim was saying about Eden Hazard and the Brazilian envy of Belgium having the best player on the pitch. I think Europe has started to produce en masse those kind of players, and yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about historically the best 10 footballers there's ever been, I would think the only glaringly obvious European who would be in there is Cruyff. And I think after that, you would be just naming South Americans, really. For me, anyway. I mean, I'm sure, I know you could make a case for a few people, but I think Cruyff is the obvious European who fits into the greatest ever players. So, I mean, I suppose the traditional style of play, South America has historically produced the best of the best, hasn't it, players-wise? Is that going to continue? I think it's perhaps dubious. I mean, what do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, the style thing, I mean, football isn't folk dancing. It's not a static thing. You know, ideas are always going back and forth, back and forth. And one thing that Mark addresses in the book, you know, I think one of his favourite sides, one of mine as well, the Colombia side of the late 80s and early 90s, who were a very, very stereotypic South American side. And you could hear the rhythm of the salsa music as they played their short passing game. But a lot of the ideas had come from Holland of '74. You know, absolutely. So you get this back and forth constantly. One thing where the stereotype thing comes in is the idea that in the South Cone, that Europe is an extraneous foreign force. That's not really true. The southern country, they're European descendants. You know, Argentina, the first time I went there, I thought, why is everyone speaking Italian to me? No, it's because they speak Spanish with an Italian intonation in Buenos Aires. They do. Uruguay is very similar. I've been in Uruguay when the Italian elections have been happening there. The most Italian city in the world, the city with most Italian descendants in the world is not Rome, it's Sao Paulo.
Sao Paulo, for sure.
It's an extraordinary statistic. And the south of Brazil, lots of Italians, also lots of Germans. And this European influence is always been part of the game, always been there. Now, there has been historically, I think, a South American trait for the kind of thing that Maradona exemplified better than anyone else, I think. Improvising a solution. The smarts that the street kid needs to survive in his everyday life, that he needs to pick your pocket. And I think that exists. I don't think that is stereotypical. The thing of surprise, and I hate football when I watch it and there's no surprise. You know, when I think that the fella's going to pass to the right and he passes to the right. I love the football of surprise when he makes you think he's going to pass it to the right, but he passes to the left. And I think that is still there in South American football. Still there. It's still there in the talent that comes up. However, there's lots of dynamic processes taking place, and some of them have to do with cultures going back and forth. Some of them are internal. And in Brazil, for example, it's something that I quote in the book. This is 1985. It was the autobiography written all himself by a fellow called Zizinho, who was the best player of the 1950 World Cup, the idol of the young Pelé. And he wrote his book, and the last chapter, the last paragraph, is this warning. Here in Brazil, we are transforming the central midfielder. Now, the central midfielder who's got 70% of the possession of the team in his hands, this is the director of play. And here in Brazil, we're transforming him into a destructive player. Now, that has nothing to do with European football. It's nothing to do with it at all. That's an internal dynamic in Brazil. This is 1985, before the global market has opened up. And what Zizinho is protesting about is the obligation to win has become so important that there is now no job security for the coach. So the coach will do what is necessary not to lose in order to keep his job. So he'll just play it safe. He will defend in front of his back four. He will have another defender to make sure that he is safe. This is a dynamic that has happened as well. This is one of the reasons that Brazil haven't been producing a Kevin De Bruyne, for example, that kind of midfielder who can work the whole field. and doesn't just have lung power, has real imagination in his passing. Quite often you see people blaming European football for that. Well, European football is producing Pedri and Vitinha. Brazilian football isn't. And so that there are internal dynamics. But I think, almost like the ghost of a steam train, the kid with the talent to deceive, to make you think he's going to do one thing and do the other, I think that still exists in South American football. And I think that will always exist, because that's a product of the day-to-day realities of so many of the population.
Fantastic, wonderful. Great to hear that. Now, during the research of your book, Mark and Tim, what was the most surprising story that you uncovered during the writing of this book? I know both of you have been writing on South American football for a long time now, so it's hard to know whether there was any surprise, but I'm sure probably you might tell me one.
The most surprising? It's a tricky one. I'm not...
Or let me frame it a little in some other way, that not probably, if not surprising, something that caught your attention after a long time.
I've got a couple just to give you some thinking time, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
One was in the build-up to the 1958 World Cup. Every World Cup, Brazil react to what happened last time around, right? So 1950, they lost. It was a disaster. They lost. So 1954, they've kind of doubled down on ultra-nationalist madness. In 1958, they get organised. It's one of the reasons that they win it. And the depth of organisation was really strong. But something that I hadn't known, is that the head of the delegation, he came up with something. He was like 96-point code of conduct for all of the players, including you're not allowed to take percussion instruments with you. Like, because it's quite, the way that South African players will walk onto the field singing and walk off it's brilliant, it's lovely, it's gorgeous. Brazilians will often have a little samba thing going on not allowed to do that. Not allowed to do that. That was
gratuitous authoritarianism, basically.
Yes,
couldn't be more South American.
Indeed, yes. So that was wow. I'd still like to research that more, actually, because I think there's a story there. The bit I'm most like, Brazil in '54, they lose to Hungary in the quarterfinal, and there's a penalty there that has always been very controversial. A penalty given to Hungary, and Brazil went ballistic. They launched official protest accusing the English referee of having blown his whistle in service of the Kremlin and international communism. Gloriously mad. And I finally found it. I found quality of footage good enough to see the penalty. It's a handball, and the play. It's a very muddy pitch, and the Brazilian centre-back, Pinheiro, he kind of slips and he puts his hand down for balance and inadvertently puts his hand down on the ball. So to find that, because it's just taken as a fact in a lot of the Brazilian coverage that this penalty was the referee's gone mad and invented a penalty against us. And to actually see that there was a penalty, and you see the referee, you see him as he points to the spot, he mimics the exact gesture that the Brazilian centre-back has done in order to handle the ball. So that was great. I felt like a kind of Sherlock Holmes type detective, finally getting to the bottom of that mystery.
Fantastic. Mark, could you think of one?
One or two things. Not especially detailed, but I suppose just the level of love there was for Uruguay in Europe in the 20s. When you read some of the stories about that, just kind of in the context of an Olympics, it absolutely didn't pass unnoticed. They became real celebrities in Paris and Amsterdam during that period. And yeah, I kind of find that interesting, really, in the kind of pre televised football and all that kind of stuff. Just how much notoriety they gained over a relatively short period, really.
It makes football. It really does. I mean, the attendances when Uruguay play their first game in front of no one, and by the end, there are tens of thousands locked out the stadium. It's the moment when football becomes too big for the Olympics, and it has to have a World Cup. So that's a fantastic story, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just doing some of the kind of stato work and looking at some of those early attendances at that Olympics, and you're just like, I don't know, just over 1,000 or even less, and then suddenly like the stadium's packed, and Paris or Amsterdam are taken with this exotic team from across the ocean. So I mean that story, yeah, really interested me. I suppose another thing, just how low Argentine football goes at times, and just kind of the near misses they have, and I mean, particularly reading about the Czechoslovakia debacle in '58, and yeah, I mean, I think these days we kind of take for granted Argentina's position at the top table, which kind of from Menotti onwards is 78 onwards is more or less a given. But yeah, there's points in history where, I mean, if Argentina had won the first World Cup in 30 after the two Olympics, maybe it would have been different. But for so long they had such a downer on themselves, and yeah, I mean, sometimes these things are coincidental, and sometimes it actually takes a major upheaval to have a rethink. And like Tim was saying with the previous question, there's quite often, we kind of talk about a European or a South American style, but it's this kind of dynamic interplay between the two, really. And it's just kind of looking at how kind of Argentina and Brazil learn or don't learn their lessons in particular moments, and yeah, I suppose
Right.
those things catch my
Fantastic.
attention.
Fantastic. And my last question to you on this in this wonderful chat that I've had with both of you, Tim and Mark, is which single World Cup would you recommend fans revisit? South American Football World Cup that fans should revisit, and why?
I love 1950. And if I had a time machine and I could go back to anyone, it would be what was essentially the final of the 1950 World Cup, Brazil against Uruguay. Because I don't think football has ever meant more than it meant to Brazil on that day. And they lost. Our Hiroshima, one of the great writers called it. And you think about the idiocy of that remark now. But to say that just a few years after the war, our Hiroshima, you get an idea of just how I got to meet many years later, some of the players and the coach from that Brazil team, and they'd never forgotten it. I mean, one of them, he was dreaming about it. Nearly 50 years later, he would still find himself dreaming about that afternoon. So I think 1950 is a great story, which not a lot of people in Europe would know. But I was also fascinated by 38 from a Brazil perspective, because 38 is the one that sets the template. It's the first time that Brazil go at full strength. They nearly win. They come third. They have this great striker, Leonidas, who kind of sets the template for a little bit of bad boy, wonderful improvisation. He's a larger-than-life character. And it was a huge... It had, by this time, it had become a thing of the nation. So the government are invested. The president's daughter is the kind of mascot of the team, and radio. Now, radio is hugely important in this part of the world. In the late 20s and especially in the 30s, just takes off. In a country where not that many people can read, radio is hugely important, and radio is there, broadcasting the games live, and people will gather around radio points. As late as 62, you couldn't hear in England. You couldn't hear England-Brazil on the radio. It's not on the TV. You might get you get a highlights package later. I think the second half was on the radio, but possibly with a delay, not live. And here we are in 38, and Brazilian radio is there, broadcasting the games live. So 38 is the one that kind of sets the template. And really, I suppose, probably Mark's similar. The earlier ones were sometimes the most interesting because there's more to discover. There's more that we don't know that we're finding out, and we know we're writing for an audience that don't really know much about these either. So that I think makes those. I just hope that those wise citizens who do buy the book, I hope they don't skip the early chapters and just go to the World Cups that they remember as spectators, because I think some of the fun is in those early chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just when you were saying that, I was just thinking about reading, in detail some of the Spanish language accounts about Uruguay in 24, 28, and just mass audiences gathering to listen to a radio broadcast in 24, 28 in Montevideo, and it just seems insane, doesn't it? I mean, like
it's cold as well. Remember, it's cold. June and July in Montevideo. It's cold.
It's the wrong season, and they're like, okay, let's go out. We can all listen to the radio together, and I mean, it kind of just from where we are now, it just kind of it just seems insane, doesn't it? But very romantic, I guess, to kind of just listening to this voice, kind of describing what's going on the other side of the ocean, and yeah, incredible. So that was kind of one of the big things reading about the early Uruguayan triumphs that kind of captured my imagination. I guess another answer that came to me instantly was probably 58, just because, I mean, it's never happened since, the Brazilian triumph in Europe, the very, very young Pelé. I think that, that would be, and I think, 58 tends to be overshadowed by the other end of Pelé's career, doesn't it? When it's kind of, football's appearing in colour, and, 70, of course, a fascinating World Cup in its own right, but probably 58 would interest me quite a lot, for numerous reasons.
It's such a fascinating World Cup, isn't it? Because it's a moment where Brazil and Argentina just go off in radically different directions. Brazil have the Copa America a year before, 57. Argentina are fabulous and they win it, playing fabulous football. And then the Italian clubs come in and buy everyone, so they haven't got them for the World Cup. And then as a result of what happens in 58, Brazil suddenly become the country of football, where Argentina, who are coming back for the World Cup for the first time in years, think they're going to win it and end up getting absolutely hammered because they're off the pace. They haven't developed. And so it just sends Brazil and Argentina off in radically different directions. I mean, you see this as well at other points in history. On the response to Holland in 74, sends Brazil and Argentina off in radically different directions. So that all of that is great. There's buy the book, for crying out loud. Buy the book. It's full of wonderful stories.
Absolutely. In fact, the link for buying the book will be written in the description of the video. So please do go and buy.
This is my grandson. I'm trying to. He doesn't speak any English, but I'm trying to. One day his English will be good enough.
Hola, he would be able to understand.
Try it.
Hola, I know Spanish. I can speak in Spanish. I don't know whether he can understand.
Speak in Spanish. See if he can understand.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bem.
Bueno, ¿cómo te llamas?
Bem.
Entendeu a pergunta?
¿Cómo te llamas?
Como te llamas? Isso quer dizer, qual é seu nome?
Mateu.
He's called Mateo because his father's side of the family are Italian. And Mateo, I think, was the name of the ship that brought them across the Atlantic. Always here, we are talking about a relationship between Europe and South America, and especially the South Cone. And this makes the situation very different from yours in India, because you were colonized by a foreign force. South America, South Cone, it's very much, there's an initial stage of colonization by the metropolis. But then later on, it's a case of settler colonialism. Importing on a massive scale a working class and an administrative class as well from Europe. It's not something, but it's bizarre how this has been confused in the South American mind, because now with those ties from Europe are quite distant, a lot will put themselves in the same condition as, say, the Indian or African experience as victims of colonization, whereas they are the colonizers. Being the colonizers doesn't necessarily make them rich or from the elite, because settler colonialism needs a working class as well. So this is part of the peculiarity of the story that we're telling, the story that you would tell of either Indian football or Indian cricket. And I remember a leg spin bowler with your surname bowling India to victory in England in 1971. What a fabulous figure he was, Chandrasekhar, with the polio withered arm. And he could just bring that arm over so quickly. A fabulous thing to watch. But your story is very different from our story, because our story involves this massive settler colonialism thing, whereas yours doesn't. So they sometimes get, increasingly from the 60s, they got put into the same bag, but they are different stories with different nuances.
Great. I'm delighted you mentioned cricket, because as an Indian, we love cricket always. So, thank you so much, Mark and Tim, for your time. Before we end, I know this was the last question, but what I'm going to ask you, it was not something that was planned, but if you have the book with you by your side, I would like if both of you can read out one of your favorite passages or paragraphs from the book to end this wonderful chat. One that probably you felt was probably, if maybe the most important or the best or the most liked passage of yours.
Give me 1 minute and I'll get there.
Yeah, sure. This is a challenge. I'll just have a quick look.
Yeah.
This is just a little bit from 1954, which deals about Brazil's response to having lost the World Cup in 1950. And it involves a fellow who I got to know, Zizinho, who is one of my heroes. Only played one World Cup, could have played three. The 1953 Copa America shows the second stage of the response, a retreat into ultra-emotional insanity. Brazil were coached by Zezé Moreira in 1952 and won a Pan-American tournament staged in Chile, their first title won overseas. But Zezé was seen by some as overly pragmatic and gave way to his more attack-minded brother, Amore Moreira, for the Copa in Peru in 53. This was chaos. Brazil lost to Uruguay and twice to winners Paraguay. Before the end, Zezé Moreira and 1950 boss Flavio Costa were flown to Lima to lend a hand, or in reality, further confuse an exasperated dressing room. There had been confusion over bonus payments. Zizinho refused to take an injection in order to play. The head of the delegation was the writer, José Lins do Rego. After the tournament, he wrote a series of articles criticising everything and everyone, especially the players, who he accused of insubordination. He had suffered the misfortune, he wrote, of being with a scum of illiterates and cowards, and he picked out Zizinho by name. We have met Lins do Rego before. He raved about Brazil's racial democracy after an historic win against Uruguay in 1932. His words now shed light on the limitations of such an idea. Never one to take things lying down, Zizinho penned a magnificent reply, proving that the last things that he could be accused of were illiteracy and cowardice. The very words used by Mr. Lins, argued Zizinho, disqualified him from a position such as head of delegation. Zizinho defended himself and the players against all charges and added that Lins should be aware that no one is illiterate because they want to be, and furthermore, this condition does not diminish the moral and sporting conduct of anyone, not least because the truth remained that a large part of the Brazilian population are illiterate. Zizinho was aware that he'd written himself out of a place on the plane to Switzerland for the 1954 World Cup. Zizinho's one of my heroes. Could have played 58 as well. There was an attempt to get him in the squad at 58, and he turned it down. He said, I'm not part of the process. If I join you now, another player, young midfielder Moacia, who's already packed his bags, he won't go. It's not fair. I'm not going. So Zizinho only played one World Cup. He played 1950. And if you read the accounts of the European press, they thought they'd seen Leonardo da Vinci play football.
Yeah, and imagine making a principled stance like that, saying, I shouldn't go. Could you imagine a player doing that now? It's
not so much, no. Difficult, I think.
No. I mean, different times, obviously, but fascinating that someone would do that,
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You got one, Mark? You found one?
A very, very short one with very little imagination, the very first words of the book. For the uninitiated beginner, it would be perfectly reasonable to wonder at this point, didn't I buy a book about the World Cup? Why are we starting in Paris in 1924? Everyone knows Uruguay won the first World Cup on home turf in 1930. Try telling a Uruguayan that 1930 was the first. I think that'll do. That's the start of the book.
Indeed.
Fantastic. I think that just creates more interest amongst viewers to buy that. So please do go and buy the book. I'm going to link the website in the description. So please go and grab a copy. And thank you so much, Mark and Tim, for your generous time. We've gone over an hour, and something that I've truly, for me, it's been an education. Hearing both of you speak, and really delighted. I'm sure that all the viewers on my channel who follow me and on the channel, they'll be delighted to hear you as well. So thank you so much, Tim and Mark, once again.
It was our pleasure. Do another one in Spanish with Mark. I can just about do one in Spanish, but Portuguese is much easier for me. So do one in Spanish with him.
Fantastic. I'll connect with Mark as well. So, pues muchas gracias a todos por ver esta charla con Mark y Tim. Hasta otro capítulo de Español por Dentro. Chao.